I feel honoured to be here, and actually I was just thinking before walking up, actually the difference between Change UK and other parties is people do the graft. There's a certain man called Mr Farage who's fishing for votes at the moment, and I worked out he only turned up once to 42 committee meetings of the Fisheries Committee, and some years ago I was advising the European Commission on drugs that were being used for execution, and I turned up to all the meetings, didn't get paid, and we changed the law democratically, and it worked. It's an organisation working. But I'm a senior neurologist working in Birmingham. I've been a consultant in Birmingham for 17 years and I have a number of national roles. And as Stephen alluded to, I risked my career last month by blowing the whistle on the risk of a No Deal Brexit to Newsnight. And it was as a result of one of those national roles, I was asked to advise the Department of Health on how to mitigate the risks involved in neurology for certain pharmaceuticals. And I was sent confidential files on the 13th of March to review and ask for my views on how to mitigate the risks. Bear in mind, this was literally hours away before we originally meant to leave the EU on March the 29th. The pressure on me personally was absolutely immense. I was one of only 2 neurologists in the UK who had access to the data. Although a huge amount of work had been done on stockpiling, it had clearly not been possible to stockpile 6 weeks' supply for some drugs. And my job was quite literally to list the plan of action for this eventuality. Mostly this was to state that the drugs should be flown in if unable to stockpile. I was literally looking at whether they should come through Dover or be flown in. Not something I thought I'd be doing when I was a medical student 30 years ago in Birmingham. And simultaneously, I was being made aware from neurologists across the UK that numerous of their patients were having problems getting access to their drugs, largely for epilepsy. And these were issues that were not being seen by colleagues in Europe. One such patient is my patient. And really, I'm very honoured that Gillian is here today. I've known her for 17 years, and she sat in the front row. And Gillian has epilepsy. And although I may have taken a risk to whistleblow, I chose that risk. Gillian did not choose the risk of having epilepsy. It was imposed upon her. Gillian has extremely problematic epilepsy, and it took many, many years to control her seizures on no less than 3 different drugs. But we cracked it. We really did. In fact, I discharged her from follow-up 9 years ago as she was seizure-free. And then I got a letter from her GP, and I saw her earlier this year. She'd been admitted to hospital in status epilepticus, one of the most life-threatening problems there is in epilepsy, after a very minor change in one of her drugs due to supply problems. I knew that the very drug that had been changed in Gillian's case was one of the drugs that there were problems with stockpiling. Now, the General Medical Council guidance on raising concerns is quite specific. You must take prompt action if you think patient safety is being compromised. It was very clear to me that Gillian, and indeed many other patients' safety, was being compromised. I also was compromised if I broke confidentiality. So I spoke to my trust, I spoke to my medical defence organisation, and I spoke to a prescribed body, the General Medical Council. The GMC took 2 weeks to reply, by which stage we should have left the European Union. Wait for it, I needed to contact the Department of Health. Thus, I'm very glad that Gillian and I spoke to Newsnight. None of us have named the drug, as immediately the story then becomes about the drug company. And this story is much bigger than one life-threatening condition, epilepsy. What was the response to Newsnight? The government decided to shoot the messenger and accuse the BBC of scaremongering. Let us put that in context. The charity SUDEP Action, or Sudden Unexplained Death in Epilepsy, estimates 21 seizure-related deaths a week and rising. Not having access to epilepsy medication is life-limiting. It's not scaremongering. The BMA warned of a culture of secrecy that could undermine the ability of medics to plan care and deliver treatment. The issue goes well beyond drugs for epilepsy, but drugs for chronic pain, Insulin, radioisotopes, as we heard earlier, used as part of cancer treatment, antiretroviral drugs for HIV, CAR T therapy, amongst others. The British Society for Immunology stated that CAR T cell therapy, a recently approved type of immunotherapy, shown to be extremely effective in certain cancers, any delay in their import from the European Union could risk the lives of people living in the United Kingdom. What has it come to when doctors are warning how Brexit will risk the lives of people living in the UK? That wasn't on the bus. As The Lancet stated 3 months ago, all forms of Brexit are bad for health, but some are worse than others. Any politician arguing for no deal is to politics what Andrew Wakefield is to vaccination. Dangerous and should be struck off. People will die. We now have 6 months to make sure this does not happen, to have a vaccine for Brexit. As Donald Tusk stated, please do not waste this time. The risks to patients like Gillian are too great if we do. Thank you.